Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Tosfos Dibra Maschel, Masni Lo Behedya. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart of the Gemara so we can see what Tosfos is coming to explain. So here in our Gemara, we presented the teaching of Rav Ashi, with the answer of Rav Ashi, who explained that the questioner of Bibi Bar Abaya was referring to a case where an individual placed dough in the oven on Shabbos, bemazed on purpose. And the question is, did they permit him to remove it? Although it's also midrabanan to remove bread from the oven on Shabbos, did they permit him to remove it before he comes to an Isser Skila, or not? So in other words, Rav Ashi taught that the case has been mazed, and we need to change that the question of Rav Bibi was, did they permit him to remove it before he comes to an Isser Skila, and not before he comes to a Chiyav Chatas? The Gemara then went on to present the teaching from Rav Acha Berei de Rava, who actually said all of this behedya clearly. The Gemara said the Gemara presented his teaching, and that is that Rav Bibi Bar Abaya didn't ask a question, did they permit it, but rather behedya, he said clearly as a din, as a ruling. An individual who placed dough in the oven on Shabbos, he tiru leiler day, so they permitted him to remove it. So that's one thing that was said clearly, that it's said as a din and not as a question. And number two, he finished off, they permitted him to remove it kaidim sheyavel the Isser Skila, before he comes to Skila. So there we find as well, it was said clearly that the issue at hand was an Isser Skila, and it was done b'mezid. Let's now look at the general outline of Tosfos. The Gemara presented the teaching of Rav Acha Berei de Rava. The Rav Bibi Bar Abaya didn't ask a question, but rather he ruled that the Rabbanan permitted an individual to remove the dough from the oven on Shabbos before he comes to Isser Skila. And what Tosfos did was basically present an alternative girsa to this teaching of Rav Acha Berei de Rava. Let's now see Tosfos in the flowchart form. So in our Gemara we presented the teaching of Rav Acha Berei de Rava that writes clearly that Rav Bibi Bar Abaya said that the Rabbanan permitted an individual to remove dough from the oven before he comes to an Isser Skila. Tosfos presents an alternative girsa. Some texts state, there are girsais that say Rav Bibi Bar Abaya asked. It wasn't said as a teaching, but rather it was presented as a question. That he asked, did they permit him to remove it before he comes to an Isser Skila or not? So then what is unique about this teaching of Rav Acha Berei de Rava that we presented? What is written behedya? It's not said clearly as a din. It's still presented as a question. Tosfos explains that what was said clearly in this teaching of Rav Acha Berei de Rava is that the question at hand is, did they permit him to remove it before he comes to an Isser Skila and not a Chiyuv Chatas? So to summarize, our girsa says that Rav Acha Berei de Rava said it clearly. What was clearly? Two things. Number one, that it was presented as a teaching, as a din, as a ruling. It's permitted to remove the dough from the oven. And number two, what the person is trying to avoid before he comes to an Isser Skila. So those things were clearly the din, and that it's referring to an Isser Skila. And then Tosfos presents an alternative girsa that the only thing that changes is it still remains a question, but what was stated clearly is that the question is, did they permit him to remove it before he comes to an Isser Skila, and not whether they permit him to remove it before he comes to a Chiyuv Chatas.